Hello, everybody. My name is Elle, and thank you so much for tuning in to my podcast called A Quiet Voice, where I talk about the thoughts and opinions that go through my mind as an introverted Gen Z. Today in this episode, I would like to talk about one of my favorite hobby/pastime interests, and that would be the topic of wristwatches. To be more specific, those watches that would be categorized as fashion watches. I like studying those watches, and now this may seem like a sort of random topic. Why would I be interested in watches? And to answer that question with a question, how can you not develop an interest in watches when you have been working on them for over 2 years? So if you could just get a warm drink, find a comfortable place to sit, and relax as I take you on to another trip into my mind. Okay, so the topic of fashion watches. Fashion watches are the watches that most people come across when they walk into a store with a watch section. These are the watches that you would typically see inside of Bay or any sort of luxury fashion brand. Some of the most common fashion watch brands would be Fossil, Guess, of course Michael Kors, along with a variety of other brands of which they ended up branching into watches as well. The price point for these sort of watches is typically around the $150 to $350 range, and that's usually about the ceiling that most people are willing to spend for a watch. This of course would not exclude the actual watch aficionados or horologists, of which they have a interest into wristwatches that do expand beyond the outer case of the watch. And of course their budgets would be enlarged to accommodate the added interest. For 2.5 years, I worked for a watch and jewelry repair company. Heavy emphasis on the watches, as it was not often that we got in a jewelry repair. Most of the work that we did were battery changes, sizing, band or strap replacements, and those sort of things. The simple things that did not require actual work to be done on the movements of the watch, as those would be sent out. Over those years, I did become fairly acquainted with the different watch brands that were most popular, and that heavily favored the fashion watch brands. Those who identify as true horologists or watch lovers are often dismayed by the popularity of these fashion watches. But I could see the business sense behind them. Watches are no longer just a thing that tells you what time it is. They have become a fashion statement and are as much as an accessory as a necklace or sunglasses. We now buy watches so that they complement our skin tones or go with an outfit that we have in mind. Which is why I don't understand why a lot of the true watchmaking companies, of which have a long history in horology, have not adapted the designs so that they become more appealing to this new generation. There is a reason why these fashion watches sell, and it's not necessarily the price point, because there are watches of which do have good quality at the same price point. But it's the case design that just does not capture the attention of the current watch market for the average person. That and the lack of advertising means that they are off of the average millennial's radar. Although being surrounded by watches for over 2 years, I cannot think of a single time of which I saw an ad for a true timepiece. Not even for Tissot or Rado or any of the more sophisticated brands. I haven't seen any sort of advertising for a Swiss watch, or for most Japanese watches for that matter. I never saw a commercial or another ad for, say, Omega or Tudor, IWC, Zodiac, or any of the other well-respected luxury watch brands. But what I do keep seeing repeatedly are the advertisements for Movement or Guess, Michael Kors. These adverts are everywhere, and they capture the attention of this generation, and even to a noticeable degree, the last generation as well. If you don't go searching for these luxury brands which have a long history in watchmaking and true watchmaking artistry, then you're not going to find them, especially not here into Canada or probably into the US. What we are bombarded with are ads and displays of these fashion watches, which are great for what we mainly use them today, which, as I said, are fashion statements. But at the same time, I witness the frustration of many customers when their fashion watches malfunction after 2 years of purchase. Some of these watches are not that cheap, like Michael Kors, of which I commonly saw the price point to be at about the $300 mark. And at $300, you could get yourself a decent watch. You can get yourself a Seiko or an Orient or a Belova. And those watch brands do make quality watches at a reasonable price point. And for those who want something extra, well, then they do make more expensive, higher-end watches with more advanced movements and more expensive case materials. But it's the fashion watch that reigns supreme, because there's something about the feeling that a Michael Kors gives you that makes you think that you're doing pretty well. I would think it's a pretty similar feeling to what a Rolex can give you, but for the average person. Because people notice when you have on a Rolex. They also notice when you have on a gold-tone Michael Kors, and if you're wearing a woman's watch, it probably is bedazzled to the point that they couldn't help but take a look at the watch. Because of that, I have refused to add a Michael Kors watch to my collection, but I do take part of the joy of what a fashion watch can bring to my outfit. I am the proud owner of cheap watches and also some quality watches, but at a cheap price point. I am proud of my small collection of watches, of which does contain some brands of which you would only find online, such as the Emmy Bell or So & Co watch. I'm also proud of my cheap but recognized brand of my gold-tone Omicron watch. I feel good when I put on my Lucien Piccard silver tone bejeweled watch as well. And I remember the feeling of how good it felt to get both my Caravelle gold-tone brown dial watch on sale, and then how much better it felt when I got my Belova day, date, and day of the week sub-dial watch on sale for under $100 one Black Friday off of Amazon. FYI, all of my watches were bought off of Amazon. Why? Because I refused to pay full price for these watches, and not one of my watches had cost over $100. But I can say that it's been a year since I bought my last watch, and all of them have been going strong. Most of them over 2 years old, still haven't had a battery change yet, which means that it's already outlived some of those fashion watches I have worked on in the last few years. So what's the point of this monologue? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Probably just a little bit of withdrawal from being away from watches so long. And even though I have my own little collection, there is no work to be done on them. So here are just a couple of watch tips, just in case I have managed to pique your interest to go do a little research. Be careful when you're picking up a gold tone watch. Unless you're buying a luxury watch, that gold tone is exactly as the label implies, gold tone. In most cases, that case or bracelet is truly stainless steel underneath that gold tone, and as you wear out the watch, it will rub away and you'll be left with what's often resembling a two-tone watch because there's been enough silver exposed to declare it as being two-tone. when you see a watch of which it has multiple subdials, but they're not for the date. Instead, they seem to be some sort of stopwatch feature. That's what a chronograph watch is. And one of the things that people tend to do is leave the chronograph running, either because they didn't notice or don't know how to turn it off. And leaving that on for extended periods of time drains your battery life and also forces your watch to have to work harder consistently, thus making the movement have to work harder, and it can prematurely wear out the movement. Something to go along with the chronograph watches is that sometimes that hand, of which moves every second, is not actually the second hand for your main time function. That second hand may actually be part of the stopwatch, and that's something that you should again turn off when you are not using it. There are multiple different kinds of watches, and by kinds I mean different ways of which watches are powered. The most common watch that is sold today is a quartz watch, which is another way of saying it's a battery-operated watch of which you will have to replace once the battery has died. And you can thank the Japanese company Seiko for the creation of the quartz watch. There's then the automatic watch, of which it is powered up by movement, and it winds up the mainspring that's into the watch, and it slowly uncoils itself over a period of time, thus representing the lifetime of that watch's energy. The more you wear it, the more energy is stored until it is fully charged, and I'd say probably most automatic watches will give you about a 36 to 48 hour power reserve, which means that you do have to wear these watches pretty often if you don't want to have to be resetting the time. The kinetic style watches are quite similar to the automatic, except instead of having that mainspring be coiled, instead there would be a chargeable battery into the watch called a capacitor, and it will store that excess kinetic energy which is produced when you wear the watch. These can have a longer energy span than the automatic watch, thus making it a good compromise. And the final category of watch would be the solar watches. I myself own one, as I have a Timex Expedition solar watch, of which I bought because I wanted to test out whether or not I could be bothered to have a solar watch, as I already knew that I wouldn't be suited for an automatic or kinetic watch due to my infrequent wears of any particular watch, and I really dislike having to reset my watches on a regular basis. Solar watches are powered by using light energy, so it's recommended that when you're not wearing it, you don't store them into a dark place, such as your closed watch box. You can just have them out onto your dresser or a table into a room that gets a decent amount of light during the day, and in most cases you should be fine, with the most intensive charging happening when you actually wear your watch out. I would usually just place my solar watch at my balcony window one day a week, as it doesn't get direct sunlight, so it doesn't get heated up, but it does get a good amount of light exposure, which will keep it going consistently, even if I don't wear the watch at all. And lastly, I'd say just know what your priorities are when you buy a watch. I think it's completely fine to just buy a watch solely based on what it looks like on the outside. As long as you know what the watch is actually worth and you're okay with paying that much for its expected lifespan, then I see no problem with that. But chances are, if you do buy a fashion watch, that watch is probably not going to be working past the next 5 years. And if you're a little bit rough with the watch, say if you drop it, then don't expect it to still be having that same lifespan after that. A good watch can last generations, but it's also the kind of watch of which you would want to maintain, as these watches are not as simple to repair, they are more costly, and you would have to see an actual watchmaker to fix the issue. Rather than with a fashion watch, if you really are attached to the aesthetics of the watch, and you don't want to buy a replacement, then the inside movement of the watch could simply be replaced as it would be a generic movement. There are some exceptions to that though. Watch brands like Cartier and Gucci seem to have a good balance in between fashion watch design and elegant movements. But the same rules would apply as the other luxury watch, and you would probably want to make sure that your watch is maintained and seen by a specialist, and not just any simple watchmaker. Okay? So this has been a sorta episode, but we'll see how these go into the future. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast, and I hope that you'll be back soon to hear about the other thoughts that go through my mind.